Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic Podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. Today I'm joined by Awesreek, lead developer of Viscerafest. Awesreek, how are you doing today?
I'm all right. Very, very busy right now.
Well, I'm
Been,
glad to. Oh, sorry, I
yeah,
didn't mean to cut you off there.
no, you're fine. Just we're in a very, very, very busy period right now. Juggling a lot of things, and getting pretty close to the early access period, actually.
Well, that's great. I'm happy to hear that you're doing all right, and also happy to hear that your game is getting closer to that early access period. Because I know a while back at one of the Steam Game Fests, you did do a demo, and the demo was fantastic in my opinion. I enjoyed it. It was a nice, unique take on the first person shooters, the retro first person shooters or what have you that are coming out, where it felt a little more whimsical in my opinion, just because a lot of the other not to speak any against any of these other games, but a lot of the games that are coming out, they all seem to be um, harkening back to a very specific style of 20, 30 years ago for first person shooters. Well, yours took a more colorful and wild approach, if I can say it that way. So it's great that the early access is getting closer, and thank you for giving me some time with all of that on your plate right now.
Yeah, no problem.
So before we jump into my questions, um, is there can you tell us a little about yourself, a little about the Viscerafest and the project?
Yeah. So I started getting into game development around the age of 12. I actually wanted to get into 3D animation, and that kind of started when I was 8. I had asked my dad to try and find me something that I could, like a program or something that I could use to get into 3D animation. And around the age of 12, he had found a program called Blender, which also happened to have a game engine attached to it. And I sort of used that as a way to springboard myself into game development. And around the age of 12, I started development on what is now known as Viscerafest. Definitely wasn't called that when I started out, but from there, I started on development when I was 12. In 2016, sort of what Viscerafest is now was sort of more predominantly established, and then we did, and then a few people joined the team around about 2018, 2019, and we started development on like the proper current version of Viscerafest, now running in Unity and not the Blender game engine. Um, and yeah, so effectively, I'm on a pretty much a three-person team. There's a few other people who do work with us, but like the primary development team is composed of me, my bud Elijah, who is Fireplant Games, and our composer and sound designer Michael Markey, who has been pretty busy with 3D rounds and a lot lately. So
Well, that's cool. um So, going back a few seconds there, weird way to put it. But you started at 12, so that's pretty impressive that, at 12 you kind of got your hands on some tools and just said, I'm going in. Um, is there is there anything you can share or anything you would say to other potential young developers that might be looking at the same kind of landscape or just wanting to get in as well around that age or what have you, that might have helped you if someone had told you some advice back then?
don't do what I did. So when I started out development or working on Viscerafest, or what would eventually be Viscerafest, I'd say I went in with a very, very lofty vision for what I wanted to create. I think any young creator does that early on, starting out, because you always come out swinging, wanting to make your magnum opus or whatever it happens to be, and that's the worst possible thing you can do because developing games is a nightmare. It is incredibly difficult, and it is obscene the amount of stuff you will have to deal with in the process of developing it, especially when your knowledge is incredibly limited and you don't really know what you're doing and you don't have experience. Starting off with something that has, let's say, a very lofty vision is one of the worst possible things you can do. I would say probably one of the best decisions you can make is just start out small, make a bunch of really small games. You know, they might be no longer than just like a level. Uh, just make a bunch of really small projects so you can kind of get the feel for what it's like to start something and finish something and the process that happens in between, and and slowly build up to something larger in scope. You know, I would say don't necessarily like sell or try to make a profit off of that stuff, but try and put it out in a space where you can get feedback and opinions. So that way, it's like going into your next project, you can have a small knowledge base built up of like how you can improve, what you should focus on. Um, Try and I'd say like especially if you're doing it by yourself, try and maybe learn a bit about game design because I'd say starting out for me, or really anybody, I feel like if you are coming at games from the perspective of somebody who really doesn't understand much about game design, and you're like in a very youthful mindset, one of the bigger issues you're going to run into is you're not going to really know what makes a good game. You're just going to be the I'm throwing ideas at the wall to see what sticks kind of person. And whilst that's fine for starting out, when you actually get to a point where you want to make a serious product that other people will play and buy or want to engage with, it's going to be important that you have an understanding of how to build technically competent systems and implement them in such a way that the game itself will take advantage of them. Because yeah, it's a lot more complicated than just coming up with a cool idea and shoving it into a product. And there are plenty. And the great thing about the age we live in is there's plenty of places you can go to learn about this stuff. On YouTube, especially, there's tons of creators who talk about game design. Tons of creators who also offer tutorials and stuff that you can use to learn like the basics of how to set up your mechanics and stuff like that. Um, we live in a wonderful age where there's a wealth of opportunity for anyone at any skill level to jump in, and it's I I'd say take advantage of that. Just learn and start small is kind of the best thing I could offer anyone who doesn't particularly know what they're doing.
And yeah, thank you, because that's wonderful advice. Um, a lot of people say a lot of the similar, have the same sentiment to what you're saying, and I'm not trying to, discredit anything that you're saying or limit it. That's probably the wrong word. However, it's always nice to hear that that is consistent, um, as well as the looking into good game design. That's also fantastic advice. And if you get if because as with Godot engine and other similar engines coming out now, which are geared towards younger audiences, if they start early with the mindset of looking at what is good game design, like you suggested, I think that's going to just be a better thing, in 5, 10, however many years, as the road goes on, where we will, hopefully start to see a very different methodology in game design by all these, potentially young creators that are just going to be learning at a much younger age. So that's fantastic advice. Thank you for that.
Mhm.
Now, I want to kind of go back. You said you started at 12,
Mhm.
or started the foundation, if you will, at 12. Um, what was your favorite game as like a child? So maybe when you were 12 or before then or what have you?
Who that See, the problem is that changed a lot in a very short
Hmm.
span of time. Uh, one of the more one of the ones I remember specifically from like I'd say probably age range of like 6 to 10 maybe. was on the Nintendo GameCube. There was like a Jimmy Neutron game called Attack of the Twonkies, and I was obsessed with Jimmy Neutron when I was younger. And that was probably my favorite game for a relatively long time. When I got to the age of 12, I was introduced to first-person shooters kind of properly for the first time via a friend of best friend of mine. He and the first one I remember playing was Battlefield 1942 on the PC, which is not aged well. uh, but yeah, so like those two especially, like when I was younger, I would say were sort of the main ones in my early sort of like preteen years. Um, I remember Battlefield 1942, like that one I would like obsessive. I think that was like the first game I was like obsessively playing for hours on end, uh, which is funny because it was mostly just like deathmatch games against a bunch of really dumb AI. I mean, like it was structured in the sense that it's like, oh, there's like a campaign and stuff, but it was mostly just like really big. It was basically just, hey, it's kind of like the Quake 3 style of single player design, where it was like, hey, let's just like take all this multiplayer content and like let's underhandedly like just throw our really dumb bots and AI in there, and we'll call it a single player campaign.
So yeah, I agree. Those I do remember playing Battlefield 1942 as well. And yeah, those bots were um easy picking, so to say.
They love to line up like I it's still I still find it strange when I see like the I can't think of too many games where I see it, but there's occasionally like I'll find a game where the AI is structured in such a way where it's like they love to conga line, where it's like all of them just like in a straight single file line in charge of the player. And that one especially is one that comes to mind because like they just straight up go at you in single file like so many times. It was interesting. That and just it in general, that game kind of feels rough uh, in a variety of ways from a mechanical standpoint. To be honest, it has been a little while since I've played it, but I remember like played it when I was 12, and I think I stopped playing it when I was 12 as well. But then like probably 2016 or 2018, one of those 2 years, I was like, hey, it's been a while since I've played this game. I wonder how it holds up because I remember absolutely loving it, and I popped it in, and I was like, oh no.
Yeah, it definitely is a series that has benefited from the iterative process. Whether you look at that and say it's good with the release schedule, but it definitely is a series that has evolved and done its best to at least present things a little differently as time went on.
Yeah, one of the only modern military series I actually kind of enjoyed. Uh, I mean, like even like I've got one of the more recent ones. I can't remember exactly when I had gotten it, but Bad Company 2 is still really enjoyable. Um, I've gotten 3 and 4, probably a few years after they were kind of relevant, but yeah, 3 and 4 I remember really enjoying. I think I enjoyed 3 more than 4. And if I remember correctly, it's because in 4 they kind of note some of the environmental destruction. That's one thing I actually really liked as the series went on that they sort of adopted was a big focus on environmental destruction, uh, which was it's interesting to see that kind of stuff back in Bad Company too, because it's like you could take out an entire structure uh, with like a rocket launcher. Um, and I remember, especially at that time, like especially in a multiplayer setting, something like that was kind of a bit different from typically maps are very set in stone as to how they function and how they behave, and so like being able to change like the entire landscape and flow of the level is it's kind of fun, and also probably a nightmare for level designers.
I think I would agree on all parts of that. Yes, because as you said, it was really easy in Bad Company too. That's the one I played the most of. Was really easy to disrupt the flow by just driving a tank through a building. What once used to be at that point a good place to hide was now a garage for a tank, and then nothing. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that I imagine that would be a nightmare to balance that out. And yeah, the introducing that destructibility was just absolutely wild because it just opened up so many more ways to potentially play.
Hmm.
Now, this question might be a little too on the nose. Um, with Jimmy Neutron, um, one of your favorite games. We've already talked about how one of your other previous games didn't really age that well. How do you feel about Jimmy Neutron today?
I don't know. Uh,
Fair enough.
I haven't played it in years. I mean, to be fair, uh, the show itself, uh, I don't have too much of an opinion on. Uh, it's something that I look back now at, and animation wise, definitely hasn't aged well. Um, but I think there's still some the from what I've seen. I think the writing has surprisingly was a bit better than I was kind of expecting it to be, because there will be times where it's like I return and I see some of the older shows I remember watching as a kid, and I was like, ooh, that the writing there is a bit questionable, and it's kid show writing especially is like one of those things where it's like they write it in such a way where all the characters are kind of like almost talking down to the audience, even if they're not talking to the audience itself, and it makes watching some of that stuff as an adult kind of painful. As for the game itself, again, it's been a long time since I've played it. Uh, I'd imagine it probably hasn't aged too well because it's like a licensed game or whatever, and generally speaking, those don't tend to be good. Period. So I don't imagine that it's something that has held up, but I could be wrong. It could still be great. But to be fair, it's also not like it's on PC or anything, so I couldn't just play it now. I mean, we do still have a GameCube lying around, but I don't have the urge to go plug in my GameCube into our TV or whatever and see if it's some forgotten masterpiece.
All very valid and fair points, especially on the comment of for licensed games. Because yeah, no, typically licensed tie-ins were um more misses than hits. So
Oh, they still are.
that yeah, that's probably accurate too. I don't
Square
pick up
Enix
that
is
many.
feeling that right now.
Um, are there any other games that you played as a child that you've touched on then that just aren't really what you remember, or was Battlefield pretty much it, and you haven't really went back since then?
I played a lot of. So my childhood was spent mostly on the GameCube and on the Wii.
Hmm.
Uh, and I mean, like, the Wii stuff is pretty much exactly how I remember it being, uh, which is not to say that it's bad or anything. Most of it, I would say, are kind of, well, most of the stuff I played were kind of just throwaway experiences. There wasn't, there weren't many games that I remember playing on the Wii that were like, oh, it's like a fantastic, like, single player experience that I have to go through again. It was mostly again just like mini games, like Wii Sports. I think there was like some board game one that we had. In terms of the GameCube, it was actually the most of the stuff I played on the GameCube were just like arcade games. Like remember we had like a CD, which was so weird. The GameCube had like these microscopic CDs instead of like normal sized ones, which I'd imagine is probably because they're cheaper to produce. But they yeah, on the GameCube we had like a CD that had Galaga and Dig Dug. I remember loving Dig Dug. um, there was Pac-Man on it. There was another. There's another really like ubiquitous space themed shooting game. I can't remember what it was called. It's kind of like Galaga, but Space Invaders. Duh. I don't know how I forgot that. But yeah, no, it's just lots of little games like that that were the bulk of what I remember playing as a kid. Not too many. I didn't really play many sort of bigger single player games. Probably the only one I can think of for the Nintendo Wii that we had that we played a lot of was Mario Kart, because of course. Uh, but yeah, no, not too much that stands out in my mind, honestly, in terms of games I played from my childhood. Probably because my parents were relatively restrictive of how much we played video games and stuff like that. You know, my parents constantly telling us to go play outside. So I didn't have like a. I wasn't. My friends were really more so the ones who got to play a lot of video games as children, and I always like. I would go over to their houses and play stuff, but generally speaking, when I was on my own and at my house, I didn't play much. Just because I wasn't really allowed to again play games very often. Maybe like an hour a day, and that was it. And usually, again, it was something like, it, you know, like what I've mentioned here, like Galaga. the we had Frogger 2. Was it Frogger 2? It was one where it was like, I remember on the front cover, Frogger has like a jacket, and he's being chased like by a giant piranha fish. Well, I guess it probably wasn't giant because he is a frog, but yeah, no. I remember there was like a pyramid themed area and a Jurassic themed one. But yeah, I don't know which Frogger game that is. I think it's Frogger 2, but I could be totally wrong. So yeah, just lots of little games like that. Again, not too much that really stands out in my mind.
Hmm. And luckily for a lot of those games you played, they've held up, and if only because of the simplicity of what they were trying to deliver on. So, in some ways, and I say this very carefully. In some ways, you're kind of lucky because there's a lot of games that I've played as a child, and if I go back to them now, I'm going to have that nostalgia ruined.
Yeah,
But if I go back to play Dig Dug or Space Invaders or Frogger or what have you, it's gonna still be that same experience. So I'm not going to be incredibly disappointed that the game is still that game, if that makes any sense. So I think in some ways you're kind of lucky with what you were exposed to.
yeah, it's interesting because I do hear a lot of people will say like, "Oh, this game hasn't aged well," or "Oh, this game hasn't aged well." But for me, it's like I can't think of too many games I've played, period, where I'm like, "Ooh, this didn't age well." Uh, like pretty much because pretty I could pretty much go back to like I think almost any game I played. I'm like, this plays fine. Like Dig Dug, Galaga, Pac-Man, Frogger. They're all relatively mechanically solid experiences. There's not much to them, but there's nothing like Resident Evil. The camera controls and not the camera controls, the tank controls and all that stuff are just make it kind of clunky and awkward to play. Um, or and I understand some people do like tank controls or whatever, but like generally speaking, you'll have like those older experiences where it's like in light of more modern ones, like the early attempts at like third person games or whatever it happens to be. Uh, those games because of how they control and how like their modern equivalences uh, hold up because of changes that have been made in terms of again how these games control, how they handle, uh, and generally like layers of polish that have been applied over the years means like, oh, this older experience doesn't really hold up because there's this level of technical advancement that like makes this unplayable in comparison to what we have now.
Exactly. And that's the point I was probably missing when I was making my comp. But yeah, no, you nailed it right on the head. Is you in the more simplistic times, you didn't you don't have to they didn't have to worry about that because they were delivering something that for what they were able to deliver was already a nice polished piece of work.
Yeah, like I haven't played it, but I've been told like again like the early Tomb Raider games, especially, are very clunky because you know, they were still kind of figuring out how do you do like a game from this perspective. How should this control? How should this feel? How should the platforming feel? And all that stuff. And due to the tech they had at the time or whatever it happens to be, they it's very rough around the edges, and it doesn't. If I were to play a classic Tomb Raider in light of like a more modern Tomb Raider game, it would again feel very awkward and clunky by comparison, um, which is I guess why we have the phrase doesn't age well. But again, like most of the stuff I've played, I'd say like yeah, I can't really think of anything off the top of my head where I'm like this didn't age well. Because I mean, like most of the '90s shooters, which is like a lot of the bulk of what I play, uh, they play fine. Like especially with like source ports and stuff like that. Like I can play Doom and Duke Nukem and whatever it happens to be pretty effortlessly. There's not much about them where it's like, oh, this from a especially like even from a visual standpoint, it's like pixel art is everywhere nowadays, and for the most part, those games, uh, pixel art is pretty decent. Um, you could argue how much of it is actually pixel art because a lot of it is just like images of low res images of clay models and stuff that have been like tweaked and edited. But like still, like from an artistic standpoint, they've almost been unaged by just the sheer fact that pixel art is more of an aesthetic decision now than it is a technical limitation like it was when they were making those games.
Yeah, and those, that's actually a really good point that uh that's it's almost like that it fits in the current environment just by the very nature of how it was developed. And with the whole going, back around those older games, they didn't really have an issue of aging out just because they were already delivering what would unintentionally maybe be back in vogue 20, 30 years later. And now you did mention that those are currently the games you're playing. Are those, do you have any current favorite first person shooter games or just
Oh,
current favorite games?
I mean, of course, I have plenty. By far, my favorite game is Doom Eternal. Mostly because, well, especially with that. So when Doom 2016 came out, and by the way, I wouldn't classify Doom Eternal as being like a retro shooter. I would sort of say that it's its own thing. Uh, I don't want to give the impression that it's like, especially because of the way we segued into that I'm saying Doom Eternal is a retro shooter.
Of course,
Um,
of course.
no, Doom Eternal for me, when Doom 2016 came out, absolutely loved it. But the big thing for me is like the more and more I played it, the more and more I kind of realized there was like a lot of missed potential and a lot of poor decisions that were made with it. Uh, and it was an experience that's like, for as much as I loved it, I felt it was undermining its own strengths because of a lot of the creative decisions that were made. And going into Doom Eternal, I remember even I had a friend who I was talking to at the time, and and they were like doing the reveals and everything, and I was like, You know, sort of these are the things I hope they address. And when Doom Eternal actually rolled around, like pretty much all the complaints I had with Doom 2016 are like why this game existed in the first place. A lot of the creative and core design decisions and mindsets that were effectively the backbone of Eternal were all basically things that existed to address a lot of the issues I had with 2016. And so for me, it was like the perfect experience. It was like pretty much everything I wanted it to be. I mean, like, I have like minor nitpicks and stuff with it, but it's an experience that I can like constantly return to effortlessly because it is. I'm trying to think of how to put it. It's an example of a game that is both. I don't know. My brain's farting on this one.
And you know,
It's yeah,
that's fine. Because I think a lot of people will share your sentiment with Doom Eternal in that um, it's it really is a fantastic game. For me personally, it was my game of the year last year. Um, because I don't know if we would share the same opinions on what it did real well or what it fixed, but at its core, I felt that it was yet another evolution in what a first person shooter could be. A first person arcade shooter. I want to be very careful on that because, um, a Doom game, Wolfenstein Doom, um, are not the same as, say Halo or Call of Duty, where, it's restrictive on how many guns you can carry, like different mindsets, different design philosophies there.
yeah.
But I strongly feel that Doom Eternal, yes, I agree completely, is its own thing, um, in such a marvelous and at times frustrating way when you're trying to explain it to someone that might not know what you're meaning. And I say that from the standpoint of, if you explain what Doom 2016 is to someone, if you just call it an arcade shooter, for the most, they're going to have a very good idea of what that is.
Yeah.
For me, if
It,
you tell someone that Doom Eternal is an arcade shooter, you're not doing it. You're doing it a disservice because a lot of the stuff that it does is, again, just pushing that bar so much higher. And sorry, I
yeah.
did not mean to cut you off there.
No, you're fine. Yeah, no. So the thing for me, because I'm sure some people will be curious, because I do know there are some people who enjoy 2016 more than Eternal. Uh, for me, the primary thing. So like basically, for those of you who don't know, kind of how the. I mean, I'm assuming most people understand and know how the 2016 reboot kind of came to be. They were working on Doom 4, and then so there was sort of a period of reevaluation where they sort of like asked, what is like the sort of soul and identity of Doom? What is, what makes Doom Doom? And sort of in doing so, they kind of came up with like a few sort of core pillars. A lot of those core pillars, things like resource management, enemy prioritization, obviously, in a very generic, sweeping way, fast-paced combat. But kind of the issue I had with 2016 was that with some of the because of some of the balancing decisions that were made, they undermined core elements of the game, like the resource management, for example. And what I really liked about 2016, and the thing that really made it stand out to me at the time, was it was like, oh, they've got like these really interesting, really cool and fun ideas for like, uh, tying the resource management directly into the combat itself. But in the process of again how they balanced it, the game undermined some of those elements. So it was like, oh, you don't really need to like think about or worry about your resource management. You don't really need to think or worry about like your health or your armor or your ammo or stuff like that because at a certain point you're just going to be drowning in the stuff. It's like the entire purpose and role of like the chainsaw and the glory kills are undermined by the fact that for one, you can have so much ammo at once that you know it's like you will never run out, and even if you do, for one, there's ammo pickups lying all over the levels, and there's health pickups lying all over the levels. So it's like, you're not, in a backwards way, it's like where they built these systems to encourage aggression and to encourage the player to be to push forward into combat and stuff. They also like underhandedly uh, built ways for player. They underhandedly, because of the way it's balanced. You're not actually encouraged to do those things, um, which to me was really disappointing. It was like, again, you have like these really cool ideas for how you're gonna change the dynamic of resource management. But you're not actually going to take advantage of that by properly forcing players to manage their resources. Another thing is like, enemy prioritization and stuff in that game is kind of undermined by the fact that there's not really any enemies that pose much of a threat to the player. Like the most dangerous enemy in Doom 2016 is the Imp, because they can one-shot you on Nightmare, and like Barons can't. Like, I don't understand what the mindset there was, because like the Imps, they can like charge up fastballs, and the fastballs, again, they can like one-shot you basically. But it's like, why would you make it so that the starting enemy in your game is the most difficult to deal with? I don't understand the mindset there, and I'm not even sure it was intentional. But like, like nothing, and like everything else, like the Macubuses, the Cyber Macubuses, the Barons, all the enemies you would think are supposed to be like the big threats in the room. None of them really are, and as a result, there's no real push or reason for players to think tactically. Because like one of the reasons why I love retro shooters so much is because like they are, and I hate to use this term because I've seen it used a lot in like in sort of like a marketing way where it's like, oh, we're going to use this to try and sell our game, but like it's the thinking man's shooter in a way. Because they're not dumb and mindless. It's like you have to think about your resource management. You have to like look at the battlefield and consider what is the most dangerous threat that I want to focus on right now. Like because when an archvile strolls to an encounter, it's like you're like focused. Like that's the thing I need to remove from the fight right now because otherwise I'm screwed. But there's again like this. It's sort of a chess game. Where what weapons do I use on what enemies, and all this stuff, and especially with like the balancing of the weapons, they undermine like that aspect of it in 2016, where it's like you don't really have to think about what you're using on what enemy and yada yada yada. They effectively undermined the chess game element of Doom that I personally really like. A lot of what made Doom 2016 so fun and so enjoyable was more so because of the I would say how you can push the systems more so than in classic Doom, because it's like you can abuse the cooldowns between weapons firing with like hot swapping and stuff like that. So you could do quick switch combos and stuff like that, which is really really fun. But again, or little things like that where it's like the more it's like you can abuse the systems, so it's like you can do more damage more quicker, things like that, where I'm trying to think, or like in Doom Eternal you have like the meat hook, so you can like fling yourself above the arena absurdly high, or whatever it happens to be. Games that effectively have systems that you can push almost harder than the game intends you to are really fun. And Doom 2016 was kind of like that, where because of the range of abilities it gave you, Ultra Kill is another one, but because of the range of abilities it gave you, it's like, when you look at, say, a new person who's coming to this game with no experience versus how like somebody who's played this game for hundreds of hours plays it, it's like two vastly different experiences that are going on right there because of just, again, how much the game gives you the ability to do and how far you can push that. there's not a ton of games from the '90s that really kind of gave you that kind of experience, especially not classic Doom. Um, but it was that to me was like why 2016 was so enjoyable, and I really wanted them to with Eternal kind of rein that in, and it's like okay, now we get the the resource management back, the focus on like juggling, focusing on different enemy types, uh, and even heck with one thing I wasn't expecting to do, which was the weak point system. It's like not only do they have you sort of a combat chess where it's like you're focusing on enemy types and what enemies or what weapons you use on what enemies and things like that. But now it's like with the weak point system, it's like you take that even further because it's like, oh, now I have to like focus on weak points as well in that meta game where it's like maybe I don't necessarily need to take this enemy out, but I need to take out that weak point because his specific weapon that he has in that moment could screw me over while I'm focusing on the more important threat. And it's an interesting way to spice up even sort of that thing, which is a big part of like I've heard some people say like they don't view Doom Eternal or Doom 2016 as being really Doom games because they I guess they have a fundamentally different understanding of what the games are trying to do, which in my mind what those games do is they effectively look at sort of the core DNA of the original game and they say how do we reinterpret this in sort of a modern lens, you know we have resource management, we have enemy prioritization, we have these I don't call it nonlinear because that's not what they are. I call it pseudo nonlinearity, pseudo nonlinear levels and stuff like that. Taking those things and sort of restructuring them and rethinking them from the perspective of sort of a modern AAA perspective, where all those elements are still present, but but the ways in which they're present are different. It's like again with the resource management. Now it's that's an integral part of the combat itself. You're not just running around picking up pickups. You're actively like creating the resources as you play, or or the structure of levels and things like that. It's again taking ideas and sort of twisting them in a way where it's like it's the same thing from a broader, more how would I say surface level perspective, but from a like if you actually go in and like analyze it, it is fundamentally a bit different in the way that it's implemented. Um, and sort of that is in my mind what they were trying to do with these games is like capture the same ideas but just twist them in a more modern sort of way.
And definitely, yeah, because I can see where I see, like, I understand what you're saying, and I agree that it's they did a lot of distilling down on what made the first person shooter quintessential, or made Doom, I guess you would say more quintessential, and they just expanded on that, and then they expanded on that even more, and that's I agree completely because that's a fantastic way to go about it. Hopefully for the next Doom game, they do that even more. Now, I want to take a little bit of a step back because you had mentioned playing a lot of older first person shooters. Is there like an older first person shooter that you think maybe people didn't really get that aren't aware of that you've rediscovered as as you've gotten older that you think people should be aware of or to check out?
Um, Powerslave is one that comes to mind. I just recently started playing Powerslave, um, and it's a build engine game that I knew existed, but sort of like for those of you who don't know, there's a sort of console port version of Powerslave, and there's a PC port version of it, and they are both very different games. um, the one that people always talked about very favorably that I've heard about was the console one, and there was like a port of that called Powerslave E, which I had played. And so that was sort of in my mind. It was like, why would I play the other version of it? Because the impression I've been getting is that it's just like an inferior, sort of lesser game. Because it was effectively just, it was another build engine game, basically. But no, I've been playing the PC port, not the PC port of the console version, but the regular PC port. Uh, and yeah, I was kind of surprised. It feels a bit better to play, in my opinion, than the console port version does. It's it doesn't have the same Metroidvania elements that the console ones did. I think it was on the Sega Saturn. But it is a surprisingly enjoyable and competent game. And I feel like most people just haven't looked at it because really it hasn't even been available until recently because GOG just just recently released. I don't know if it's on DOSBox or what it is. I use the GDX source port to play it. But yeah, if anybody wants to play like the original PC version of Powerslave, it's available on GOG. It's really enjoyable. It is a relatively substandard retro shooter. I think the only thing that really stands out in my mind about it is there's like some light push puzzle stuff in there. Uh, and it's definitely not, in my opinion, the best of the build engine games, but I would say it's still a pretty decent one. It's funny because like everybody talks about the build engine games, and it's like there's three good ones and all the other ones are trash. But I and I feel like a part of that's because like most of them are, and it's generally safe to assume that kind of a lot of them are trash because I forget what it's called, but there's like a nom or something like that. Redneck Rampage is just. Yeah, no, like I would genuinely recommend Powerslave. It is a pretty decent game. It is, in a way, more of the same. If you've played like a build engine game before, like from a surface level perspective, you can have a vague idea of how it's going to play. But yeah, no, it is pretty fun. If you do enjoy that kind of stuff, I would say definitely check it out.
And yeah, I definitely will. I've never heard of this game, but I've made note of it, so I am gonna look that one up later.
Yeah,
Just
it's
because it's always
it
great to have more games or newer game or not newer, but you know what I mean. To look into.
Yeah, it's worth noting it does have two names. I'm not sure what it's called on GOG, but the one I mostly call it is Power Slave, but it's also known as Exhumed, um, which is EXHUMED. So if so, I could be wrong. I'm pretty sure it's called Power Slave on GOG, but yeah, definitely check it out. It is pretty enjoyable. I'd say
Yeah,
my own
definitely.
Yeah, I'd say my only real complaint or I should say like a minor warning, if you get lost easily, its levels can be a bit confusing at times. So do keep that in mind. But for me, I have a pretty good sense of direction, so I don't get lost too much. But it was one of those. It is one of those games where I can kind of tell other people are gonna struggle with because of how winding some of the maps can be.
Fair enough, and always a good thing to throw out there for anyone that is, going to take the plunge into, especially older games that kind of had some winding maps. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about this because this is a question I do like asking everyone that I talk to. And you you seem to have tackled this in a very different way. So this is kind of a two-part question. Um, so normally it starts with how do you feel about the current landscape for games and the game's fandom and how you interact with fans. And for those that don't know, you have what seems to be a very active Discord where every week you guys have well, more often than every week, because I've been kind of creeping it and watching, but every Friday at the very least, there's a good core group of people where you guys come together, you join voice chat, you play games together, or you stream games and you watch and you talk about it. So I'm excited to ask this question just because that I haven't seen that kind of consistent interaction with anyone else I've spoken to. So how do you feel about the current games fandom interaction with fans?
I'd say take it on a case by case basis. I think that the tools that are offered to creators and how they allow them to interact with their communities is fantastic. But obviously, it goes without saying, there are great communities and there are communities.
Fair
um,
enough.
uh, so in regards to climate, I'd say, it's 50-50 toss-up because, again, there's some communities I've joined where it's like they're very open and welcoming to new people, and then there's communities I joined where everybody's just kind of mean and not very nice. So it's taken on case by case basis, but I'd say the tools that are offered to creators to communicate and share with people on the platforms that are on offer, I think, are fantastic. And for me, especially in regards to being a creator myself, I think it's incredibly important that creators engage with their community and that they be a part of their community and they be an active presence within it. It's always kind of interesting to me. I get a lot of people who will pop in and are like, "Oh, you're like the first sort of game dev I've even had the chance to talk to," and because like I'll be in other servers and it's like the developers, they don't really talk to or engage with their communities that much. Like they're kind of just uh, an overseeing presence within the community rather than like an active member of it. And yet anybody in my server will tell you I'm like one of the most active members within my community. And I think that's incredibly important. I think there needs to be an understanding between both devs and players. So it's like, we are people. We relatively normal people, most of us. I mean, I'm pretty weird, but um, for most people, like I feel like a lot of developers are kind of put up on this pedestal where it's like a lot of people have I feel like this. So again, it's like within a fan base, you'll have those people who it's like, oh my gosh, I'm talking to the developer. Oh dear lord, like it's like it's so amazing, and I'm just like, yeah, I'm here, I'm this guy. I say words. I make Vigigim. But I do think it is important and healthy for there to be a dynamic relationship between both the players and the developers of the game, because I don't feel like as a developer it's very easy to disassociate with the people who you are making your game for. Um, it's very easy to sort of look at people from this perspective that they are just they're players. You don't really have an emotional attachment to them or anything. They give you praise or they don't. And being there and present and getting opinions on the ground level is useful and helpful to get an understanding of the perspectives and opinions that people have. And then furthermore, from the perspective of the player, it's just nice to one have the presence of a developer constantly among them, to have somebody like to get to know the person who's making the games you're playing is enjoyable, and and to have a community where it's like kind of everybody's friends, everybody knows and talks to one another, uh, and which is a big reason why I think it's important to be engaging with the community. You always want your community to be a friendly and a welcoming place, so that when new people join, it's like somewhere people want to be. Uh, I've joined plenty of communities where it's like they're a trash dump, and I leave just as quickly as I joined because it's like I don't want to be around these people, and sort of monitor behavior and to sort of be both an enforcing and encouraging presence and a role model within a community. I think is important. But it is always interesting to kind of see the dynamics different communities have. Again, in terms of the main question, like how do I feel about sort of the current landscape for game communities and stuff? I think that what is on offer in terms of the way communities can be shaped is probably better than it's ever been because of the level of communication that is at our disposal. Uh, but how well and for what reason that communication is used um, is always something that kind of ranges from place to place. So it is again taken on a case by case basis.
And yeah, I understand what you're saying there because you are absolutely correct, and it's kind of like comparing apples to oranges in the sense of you can go to one community and it'll be fantastic. You'll have a lot of involvement, like yours for example. You'll have a lot of involvement from you, um, and other communities where the devs or the community manager is there always having involvement or trying to always have involvement, and you're trying to foster a nice welcoming environment. And then you have some where the devs are kind of not there at all. They have they might have their own community muted. Now, I'm not saying this to throw shade at anyone I've spoken to, or that I've witnessed, but I've as someone has joined different Discord communities as well. I can definitely see that there are probably a lot of use cases where people kind of just make a community and don't really
They
help
forget about
foster it.
it. Yeah, it is. It is also worth noting, like especially from the perspective of, of a developer, a lot of them are very, very busy.
Hmm.
So maintaining a community is something that is not necessarily feasible for everyone because, again, if you're overwhelmed and you're busy and you've got thousands of things you got to be juggling at any time, uh, you know, also having to regularly engage with everyone is can both be exhausting and time consuming, um, and it can distract from your work, which isn't necessarily something that you want to be the case. Uh,
Exactly.
so it's definitely not like shaming anybody who isn't. It's just that I think it's best if if like developers or community managers or whoever it is that are effectively trying to cultivate a community. I think it's best if they are an active participant within that community.
Exactly. And you kind of said it for me. I wasn't intending to speak ill of any developer that might not devote a lot of attention to their community because it's exactly as you said. That takes energy, and when you already have so much going on, it's important to remember that developers are people too and they have their own life. So yeah, so it was unintentional what I did there. And thank you for I don't know if you were pointing it out to me or just in general, but no, that's a very good point to keep in mind that developers are people too, and it's not always easy to devote time um and resources to doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't want to keep you for too much longer because we all have stuff to do, and you especially, as you said, you're getting ready for the early access launch. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask if there's anything you wanted to make sure people aware of. A favorite game that you're playing lately that you want people to know. Something about your project. Just anything really that we might not have covered that you really feel people should be aware of.
Well, I do think it's worth noting we are going to be having a trailer coming out in a couple of weeks, pretty soon here. There's plans are still kind of up in the air as to exactly when things are launching, but I will say seems like things are going to be falling into place within the next month or so. So if you're interested in Viscerafest, definitely keep a lookout because we're going to have some very likely have some announcements coming out very soon regarding the release date of the early access period, and what you can come to expect from that. Um, Other than that, not really much that I can think of off the top of my head. I have a Twitter page. If anybody wants to, directly follow what I'm doing and the game's development, uh, and obviously see announcements, I'm pretty much like constantly posting there on a daily basis. Um, if you want to see my cat, which everybody is obsessed with, and some people can actually come up with conspiracy theories that I am just being manipulated by my cat. And my cat's the real one making Viscerafest or something, or I'm making Viscerafest in the slave chamber that my cat owns or something of that equivalent. Um, you know, My Twitter is at Awesreek, and I think I have like for my username, I have like the way Twitter has things set up is strange because it's like you can have like your actual username, but then it's like on top of that you have like a name attached to that. But my username is at Awesreek, but then it's like Awesreek Viscerafest Dev or something like that, or just Viscerafest Dev. I'm not sure anymore. I'm going crazy. Um,
Oh, and
yeah,
that's fine. Oh, because like I'll 100% make sure that that is properly linked, so people don't have to worry about um finding the right username. In the event that, as you said, it's if it's one thing or the other. So you don't worry too much about that, because I will definitely make sure that people can find you um in that regard.
yeah. But yeah, I post tons of like teaser images and stuff like that. Stuff we're working on currently. Just today, I posted some stuff regarding the main hub space that's going to be available in the early access period. So if you want to follow the game's development, pretty much get like on the spot, like when news is coming, I'll pretty much post it right away. Um, that's kind of the place to be. That and our Discord, which I can give you the link for as well if you want that. Yeah,
And
I'll
definitely, yeah, I'll definitely take that link as well, because like I said, I want to do whatever I can to help people find more about you and the game and the community and everything. So yeah, I'll take whatever you want to give me to make sure people see. No doubt about that. Now I do want to make a quick note that depending when this does, whenever you're listening to this, it might already be out in early access. So you know,
I mean, like, I don't know how long it takes this stuff, but I don't think it's going to be at least a month before it goes into early access. So I'm not sure how soon you're releasing this, but right now it is the 29th of March. So it'll probably be toward the end of April, wait, early May, when we go into early access. But yeah,
awesome. And that's I'm looking forward to the early access of your game as well. I think like I said earlier, when I tried the demo, I thought it was a nice change of pace compared to a lot of the other, retro styled shooters that are coming out. Again, not speaking ill to any of those, just yours is, I felt, far more colorful and whimsical. That's definitely the wrong word, but um far more colorful and with just, I'm just gonna go with whimsical. There's no other word that I can think of right there.
it's so magical how she consumes the flesh of her enemy.
Yeah, well, yes, exactly, exactly. Uh, yes, the story as well is fantastic. For those that are not aware, in the closing moments here, I'll give the best synopsis that I can. But your main character is looking to afford the wedding ring and wedding in general, I suppose, for her fiance. So she takes one big contract and seemingly gets in over her head. Also, she can fund the engagement ring for her love. And
You play as a bounty hunter who takes on a job to hunt down a religious zealot. Yeah, so that she can buy a ring and propose to her boyfriend.
which is absolutely phenomenal and absurd in the same time. Um, and I'm definitely looking forward to this game. Now, Osric, if there isn't anything else you want to make sure people are aware of or discuss, I'm gonna let you get back to your day so you can get back to working on getting that game out there.
Yeah, no, I don't really have much else to say.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, definitely let you get back to your day and working on the game. So yeah, thanks again for joining me on the Red Tunic podcast, and a special thanks to you, Osric, for making some time to have this conversation with me, as well as a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of his music from the title track Road Steep. And if you do like this podcast and want to support it and help it grow, please subscribe to receive the latest episodes, and be sure to share with those who you think might also enjoy it. Again, thanks again for listening, and as well as Audrey. Have a wonderful day.